This waterway is really, really important. It's crucial to the world's economy, it fuels nations, and it could be this global superpower's biggest weakness. This is the Malacca Strait. The Malacca Strait is a narrow strip of water in Southeast Asia. It sits between the Indonesian island of Sumatra, the Malay Peninsula, and Singapore. It's about 500 miles long. And at its narrowest point, here, it's only about 1.7 miles wide. And yet this is one of the most important shipping routes in the world.
Even more than the Suez or the Panama Canal, this is the major artery of global shipping.
Why is it so important? Because this is the quickest and therefore cheapest route for goods moving between the Middle East and East Asia. Around 94,000 ships travel through here, carrying 30% of the world's traded goods every year. But for countries like China, its importance goes even further. It receives 80% of its oil through here. This means it relies on tankers successfully bringing oil from the Middle East through the Malacca Strait to keep its economy going. This reliance on the Malacca Strait is a problem for China. The narrowness of the waterway means it could be blocked by another country, or unintentionally. If this happened, China would struggle to receive oil as cheaply, and the rest of the world would also suffer. Nearly half of the world's shipping fleet would be required to reroute around this Indonesian archipelago. China gave this fear a name: the Malacca Dilemma.
The Malacca Dilemma is kind of this boogeyman that's been living in the minds of Chinese strategic thinkers for a few decades now. The idea that any potential adversary, most likely the United States, could close the Strait of Malacca. That's been overblown. I mean, closing the Malacca Strait, even if it were feasible, which nobody's really sure it is, wouldn't actually stop the flow of oil and gas to China. It would just make it a little more expensive. But that doesn't mean that China hasn't responded to those irrational fears.
A US blockade of the strait would only happen in a crisis if the two countries were at war. And the most likely way this could happen is if China invaded Taiwan. China has always resolved to reunite the island with the mainland, even if that means using force. Taiwan is an ally of the United States.
Are you willing to get involved militarily to defend Taiwan if it comes to that?
Yes.
So any escalation here could see an immediate flare-up of tensions here. China has also been beefing up its own military power, particularly in the South China Sea.
They want the South China Sea because they've told themselves it belonged to them.
It's built outposts here, as well as artificial islands in disputed waters, complete with radar, missiles and runways, which it says are for defensive purposes. And it's been fiercely protecting its claim over the sea, as well as building up its presence in the Indian Ocean. This network of commercial facilities, which follows China's energy supply route, is sometimes referred to as the String of Pearls.
I mean, the String of Pearls, in a sense, is a boogeyman for India in the same way that the Malacca Dilemma has been a boogeyman for China. China's negotiating access and logistics and acquisition agreements all over the world, just like the US Navy does, just like the Royal Navy does, just like the French Navy does. China's also, on top of that, putting a whole lot of money into commercial ports that then might give preferential access to Chinese vessels.
Most of India's shipping travels through these waters, so it has a huge interest in their security. The two countries have come to blows over their disputed border in the Himalaya region.
India's got good reason to be deeply suspicious of China's long-term intentions, and so naturally it would much rather not have China both to its north and its south, meaning both in the Himalayas and operating in the Indian Ocean.
But as well as dominating the Indian Ocean, India has another strategic advantage over China. These islands here, which are Indian territory. As you can see, they form a sort of lid on top of the Malacca Strait. India has naval bases on these islands already, but the country's Prime Minister Narendra Modi wants to ramp this up. There are plans to transform Great Nicobar Island into a huge military and transport hub.
China is definitely driving India's modernization of the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. You want to be able to monitor Chinese vessels as they enter and leave.
India is also part of an alliance known as the Quad. Along with the US, Australia and Japan, they regularly hold drills with their navies. Australia wants to establish a military base in the Cocos Islands and has plans to upgrade this base near Perth to support nuclear-powered submarines. This is seen as part of a plan to counter China's growing footprint in the region. Not only is this narrow waterway one of the most important trade links in the global supply chain, it's also where some of the world's most powerful countries are battling it out for influence and control. And the Strait's positioning as a critical gateway for the supply of energy and goods means that it has a direct impact on the political and economic policies of this region and far beyond.